Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer. And today we're going to be doing a little bundling group of different books or media that I have experienced in the last couple of months that I haven't actually gotten to talk about yet. This is a way to just kind of share more books or more things that I have looked at without having to, without doing a super long, in-depth thing on them. It allows me to do just a little bit more and to talk about books that I may not otherwise have talked about, because some books that I read are not really I don't really feel the need to do a long discussion on them. It's a good way for me to share just in general more of what I'm doing and also to just get to read more books. So now you got to stick around to see what books we're talking about today. We got some highs, we got some lows, we got a TV show, a video game, and a movie, which those will all probably be gone over very quickly. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creative genii. It's a real word. Because you guys are great. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit it to the Fresh Meat feature, your first chapter and your cover, that chapter will be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work. Trust me, it works. I have at least bought books from that list, and at least one of the books today is from that list. I have a couple others that I've purchased that I haven't been able to read yet for reasons. And apparently this year is the year of the long books, so it's taking me a little bit longer to get to books that I would like to get to. But even if I'm not your reader, but the Fresh Meat feature is specifically to help get books out there that I might not pick up because they might not be my taste, but I'm not the reader for every book, and that doesn't really matter. So I'm going to give any book a chance, even if it's not my thing, to find its audience, because they are waiting. You just got to find them. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the local library upon request. And my next book, Body More Zero, is actually coming out in October. It features these two gentlemen right here as the main characters. So if you'd like to know more about it, stick around, watch for the arc coming out later this summer and the actual release in October. And with that said, let's jump into the book reviews. Right, we got a special screen. The first one is actually a book from the Fresh Meat feature list, and I actually read it a couple months ago, but it's taken me this long to be able to have a list together of things that I can review all together, just obviously because I've been reading long books. And the current collection of books that are going up right now. We'll be back to those hopefully next week. I will be reading The End of Alice, hopefully, by the time this video goes up. So that might be in the cards, because some of you have suggested me more books to read on the theme. Anyway. The first book of discussion for today is The Dark Violinist by Lauren Chambers. I would describe the genres as horror, gothic, supernatural thriller, and the summary is this. The novel opens with a prologue where a couple of guys are in a furnace room making a deal with the devil to become the best at what they do and then die when it's achieved. Chapter 1, we go forward in the future by some 20 years, and one of the men from the furnace room is sitting at a concert watching a show where a girl is being applauded even though she hasn't done anything yet. He's watching his biggest nemesis, a conductor, and thinking on how he is going to beat that man. Let's move over to the second protagonist of this book, and it is a young man named Sebastian, who's a poor kid working at a convenience store or a drugstore or a liquor store. His dad's dead. His mom beats him for playing the violin because the violin is what ended up killing his dad. I hope then when you make the connection there that the deal with the devil with the violin probably killed his dad, and so he avoids playing it. During his work, his coworker and friend Money is killed in a robbery, and shortly thereafter he's contacted by the conductor from the beginning of the novel, who Money had sent a video recording of Sebastian because she believed in him, had heard his skill before, had thought that he had something special about him and his playing, and wanted to see something better for him than a dead-end job in this garbage store. After the two of them talk, Sebastian decides to move in with the older man and his family and to train underneath him as part of his orchestra. We later find out that this older conductor was one of the men in the basement at the beginning, and Sebastian is the son of the musician from the beginning. So everything unravels this mystery of what has happened. Sebastian's corruption, as music is always tied with demons, obviously, and the more he plays, The more demons kind of come in, and kind of also there's some social and economic things that play with Sebastian coming into this high economic status place when he does not really fit in and what people expect of him, and bonding with the conductor's daughter. And yeah, what do you think is going to happen in a story that starts with a deal with the devil? Pretty much the only thing that can happen: tragedy. And I thought this book did a great job of building tension in the scenes. It also had a great job of setting up very different characters. The one thing that I did want to complain about for the setting of the characters is that they all sort of swore in the exact same way. And so when they started swearing, they all started sounding the same. So you had this, 50-year-old conductor who was a higher class person who would swear in the exact same way as this 20-something-year-old from the poor side of town, and it homogenized their voices and stopped making them sound like individual characters because they all sounded exactly the same when they started swearing. I don't know if you can tell. I love stories that pit good and evil, and especially that have some sort of faith lens on them, but I am also very, very specific on how I enjoy angels and demons and the deals with the devil type stories, because yeah, they're very cliche in general, but if you do them right, I love them. I mean, yeah, they can be very cliche in general, but if you do them right, if you do them in these specific way, I really enjoy them because I feel like a it is such a common and also a real story that has a mysticism mixed in with the real life, as you do. And so I really like that sort of thing. And this was one of those books that I appreciated the way that faith was approached in Sebastian's character, because often when you have faith approached in a book, not every time, but it gets very annoying that you either have the like super clean, and it's specifically like Christian style fiction where it is the Gap Christian, where there's really not any super big problems. There might be a little bit of family issue, or you've got the opposite where it's straight demonization, like Unpregnant, where everybody is this character, this stereotypical extreme, and you don't actually deal with faith in any legitimate way that feels real, where you're dealing with people that might fall short of the glory of God, that might struggle with sin or temptation, that are not trying to just hurt other people or are just claiming to be holier than other people. And so I actually really appreciated the way that this book approached faith in Sebastian's character and Sebastian's struggle with temptation and what he wanted. The devil played a big part, or a total part, of Sebastian's dad's death, and he constantly references leaning on God, having faith, but then getting angry at God as bad things happen, until he finally turns on God and doesn't care anymore to appease God because he feels like God's back was turned to him a long time ago. That is very familiar as a story to how people end up turning on God or feeling like God isn't there for them and then getting angry. Unrelated to that, I think that this book could have used a little bit more editing to smooth the prose. It especially had issues with things like ascending up, as I quote, and I was noticing especially a lot of directional stuff. I don't usually like to bring up editing notes, but when I do bring up editing notes, it means that I noticed it a lot and it kept pulling me out of the story. There were also repeating individual nouns in one sentence or after another. Parts of the editing issue here is just having too many unnecessary details, and those details then ended up being repeated in the prose. I remember having issues like this in my earlier draft where it's like pinching her face with her thumb and her finger. It's not really necessary. You can just tell us that she's pinching her face, and then if it's not with her fingers, then clarify that. The prose in this novel is elevated at times, but then it can be taken to another level with a good editor or a crit partner that can help identify the repetition or the over description in the narration that slows everything down. Though this book wasn't one of my favorites to read, particularly because there was really no one in the story to really like or to care for, or that I got attached to, I did like the author's perspective and would be interested in reading more of this series as it goes forward, just to see where the story goes. But personally, I didn't like any of the characters. Now, there were a couple of quotes that I wanted to share with you from the book because I really liked them. The first one was an important quote that had to do with every man acts in service of something, and that felt like a specific thematic quote. How far away was heaven? As he turned the water off, he remembered hell was always closer. I like that line a lot. Quote, But God isn't terrible. He couldn't understand why, though. Why couldn't God just light up that candle, show that he was there and that he loved him? Did God only care when Sebastian denounced him? Maybe he should, just to see. Sebastian bit his tongue, thinking of what he could say. Fuck you, I hate you. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because he felt too afraid of God to love him. And then he knew that he didn't deserve a miracle. So this next quote is an example of something that could have been clipped down to make it a little more streamlined. Quote, Brownstone's face rounded his side like a shark gliding through a rainy room. His face said that it was anything but perfect, but he knew that he was. One way to have rewritten this is, Brownstone's face rounded his side like a shark gliding through a rainy room. It said that he was anything but perfect, but he knew that he was. And there are more ways. That was something written on the fly, and I'm sure that there could have been better ways to write the sentence, but just to streamline it so it wasn't so repetitive. And then another quote to just show an example of like some editing. She looked down at him again, then his shoes, then back up at him with her eyes. Of course, she looked at him with her eyes. That was not a necessary statement. And so there are a lot of things like that that just threw me out of the narrative that could be cleaned up and hopefully will be cleaned up in the future to make the narrative cleaner. The next book that'll be talked about is The Spook's Apprentice by Joseph Delaney. The genres would be considered middle grade and fantasy. This is an older book, I think from the mid-2000s, if I remember correctly, when it was published, if not the early 2000s. And this was actually a book that we read for the Loin Stream, which is the Friday night book club here on the channel. It was a book about a young man, I think just over 10 years old, maybe he was 9, but I think it was like just over 10, who needed to leave his house to go and become a man. And so then he got an apprentice job underneath this Spook, which is a guy that kind of goes around and gets rid of magical beings. It is basically commissioned to get rid of magical beings that are haunting places. Kind of like it felt like a magical being bounty hunter. And people kind of stay away from the spooks because they're kind of weird. They cause trouble. They bring trouble from the trouble that hunts them for the things that they are hunting. And this kid has to basically grow up very, very fast as his family is like, look, your oldest brother is having a child. We need room for the new baby. All of your other siblings have moved out. It's your turn to move out, kid. Good luck. Have a good life. And yeah, he goes to live with this Spook. He gets trained as an apprentice. He goes through his own trials. He meets this this witch. And there's some showdowns with the witch. And reading this book, I thought that it was great. I thought that it was great middle grade fiction, a great introduction to both fantasy and horror. It has both elements, and it felt like it was a fun horror book for a younger audience with great descriptions. It was also very appropriate, which is kind of nice after reading so many books for the ALA that are theoretically in schools, but they are so inappropriate. There was also humor in this, especially with the death of Billy, just for being impatient with the loss of his thumbs. And I can see why this book was popular. It's the first in a series, and I think it became the Seventh Son movie, is what we discussed. And I could see why this book was very popular with kids, though this is only the first in a series. But it does feel very age appropriate and interest level, where Tom, the main character, is introduced to responsibility and has to face his fears as well, so then he can grow as a person. The love for his family and the distance that he feels from them is a great setup for conflict and shifting into the next phase of life. He doesn't want to leave home, but he must. He doesn't want these responsibilities, but he must. He's not feeling the same sort of connection with his brother anymore as he used to, because they're all in different stages of life and he has to sort of grow into his own. So thank you everybody for voting for that book, for us to experience it together in the book club. It was a nice break. The next one that will be talked about today is the Bluster Comics website. The author or creator or somebody related to this actually emailed me a while ago asking if I would check out their website, check out their comics. And so I looked through a couple, and I'm going to talk to you about the couple that I read. And then it'll be linked down in the description below if you want to check out the website for yourself and check out the comics for yourself. I would like to make a note that when somebody sends me a story, and I'm sorry to you guys that have sent me stories and I've not gotten to them yet, someday. I'm working through it slowly, but surely I'm working through it. When authors send me their work to look at, to either possibly read or opine on, the only thing that I ask is that you prepare yourself for whatever it is that I'm going to say and not be hurt or angry when I just give an honest opinion. I'm just going to tell you what I see, and that's the risk that you take by sending me your content. Is if I read it, I'm just going to tell you what I think. And so I do try to read stuff that people send me, and there are things that end up in the there are things that end up in the comments or in my submit a topic link that's also down below where people are recommending books, and most of them I will at least take a look at to see if I can at least tangentially be interested in the idea, and I will try to take a look at them when I get a chance. So if you are an author and you send me a book or you ask if I will read your book, I can't promise when I'll take a look at it. I can promise that I'll try, but I also just say, please prepare yourself and familiarize yourself with the way I respond, because I don't want to break hearts, but I'm also just going to say what I see, and I can't do anything other than that. And the genre for this would be superhero for at least one of them, and I also think that this probably falls in line with middle grade, if not a little younger than that. So the first comic that I read from them was called Bluster Universe, which is their superhero comic on their website, and it opens with a couple of deaths, and it's discovered that the villain has stolen chemicals that cause high blood pressure, which then kills people. The hero fails to stop him, and then he asks his friends for help. Weirdly enough, he's carrying around a photo of the villain to show his friends. Days go by of the hero searching for this dude, but he has no luck, only to find him on TV saying that he's going to give everyone high blood pressure in a couple of days, and whoever dies is going to be on the prime minister's bloody hands, because the prime minister has refused to pay the bribe/ransom that Mr. Villain wants. So then the hero guy goes out to start looking for this villain. He says that it's going to happen in like 2 or 3 days. And we just skip through time until the day of the event is going to happen. And the hero is like, oh my gosh, I need to figure this out. It's going to happen soon. I don't have a lot of time. Fortunately, so he flies to the tallest building and then is like, the guy is going to launch it from up there, right? That makes the most sense for how you're going to give all of these people high blood pressure poison through aerosol from the highest point, but there's nobody up there. Then he sort of looks around and goes, maybe he's over there in that forest, and without even difficulty, he goes into the forest and immediately finds him at a fire. The two of them fight each other, and the hero this time somehow beats the villain without having to do any sort of training montage. No difference. They just sort of power fight each other, a little bit like Pokemon, where it's every attack has a name, and then they do it to one another. So he takes down the bad guy, then he goes back out into the city, and then there is the drone already going, which maybe he should have just gone after maybe he should have waited around for the drone and left the bad guy to do bad guy things. But so he takes the drone, and then he flies into space, and then throws the drone into space, and thinks, I better get back to Earth before I run out of breath, even though he's on the other side of the atmospheres. I know I'm not a spaceman, okay? I don't know the proper terminology for all this. Anyway, he returns back to Earth, and the villain apparently has not disappeared, has not gone into hiding, because immediately he is arrested and didn't use any of that as a distraction to get away. And that is the end of that issue. The second comic that I checked out was the Bluster Tales, issue 1 and issue 2, to try to get an idea of what Bluster Tales was, because each of the covers are very different. We'll get into that. But issue number 1 opens with a block of text that says, quote, "It's only been a day since I moved to this city. It's such a beautiful big city. Good thing that I decided to take a walk. Tomorrow I start my new job. I am sure things will be fine." And this comic / Bluster in general feels like it is very campy and kitschy, like kitschy. I'm not even sure if that's the right word. We get this hyper speed introduction. This dude sees this female doctor who has a free clinic that she's building and is super popular with everyone. And so this guy goes to work. We never get a name for him, so I'm just going to call him Steve. This guy goes to work in this city full of murderers, and he didn't even realize he was moving to a city full of murderers when he walks in. And he didn't even realize he was moving to a city full of murderers until his boss is like, "Hey, did you know about all the murders here?" And the guy's like, excuse me, what? And immediately after hearing that, he's leaving and going home, and then he hears a crime scene happening in the alleyway next to his house, and he's like, I wonder if I should help. You know what? No, it's none of my business. Nah, I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna pretend I didn't see that. And then the next morning he opens his computer and he sees an article for what happened outside, and he's like, oh my gosh, that man was murdered. I heard the victim. You don't say, Steve. Don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. Steve then goes back to work, and he is assigned the night shift by his boss. Immediately switch over to the night shift. Nothing is happening as he checks the news. Apparently, the lady doctor has now been arrested for murdering people. super rushing through everything at this point, establishing nothing, so then it ends up with there being no weight behind any of these actions. Then he is wandering around the factory during the night shift. The lights randomly turn off, but oh well, it's time to go home. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. The dude then decides to start investigating the murders of the city, while wondering if he could have stopped the one in the alleyway and if he should have made a different decision. So he learns that there had actually been a couple of murders that happened at the place that he works at, and he's wondering how that happened, but the boss has no info to give him. Kind of feels just like trying to skip out of coming up with anything. And he violates this do not cross police tape on the wall so that he can go and investigate the spot where the people got murdered. And he discovers like this hidden room behind the stairs back there, and what looks like an overfilled storage room, and then there's even more stuff in the hidden room. And then he discovers that similar murders happened at some point 75 and 25 years ago, and that there was a priest around the area that helped. Oh yeah, very specifically, you got stabbed in the back. There were a lot of murders, and it was possibly of supernatural origin, and a priest worked on this. So he goes to find the church that the priest worked at, and it turns out that priest died 10 years ago, but the priest that works there is like, you can go and look at his library and check out his books if you want, but I don't know anything about no supernatural creatures. So then Steve goes to the library and starts reading through that guy's books, and immediately finds a book called Abnormal Creatures, and also immediately finds references to this supernatural creature that he heard may have haunted this area. So that other priest, the new priest, obviously is not doing his share of work around here. He also learns that there was a magical suit of armor that was used to fight this weird creature. And so Steve goes to a local museum to see if he can't find that magical suit of armor, and it's not there. So then he returns to the priest in the church to ask if he'd seen anything or to ask for any sort of other kind of help. And that's when the priest from that church is like, BT dubs, we were just cleaning stuff out, and here's a whole pile of junk if you want to take any of it. And included in that junk is a magical suit of armor. Apparently, they're only just now clearing out all of this stuff 10 years after that guy's death. What would be the chances of that? So then obviously Steve takes the suit of armor, and there's also a little blade in the suit of armor that works on the beastie creature that's hiding in the factory. He goes to his night job, and then he wanders around, and then he runs into the custodian, who he asks, oh, are you the one that's been turning the lights off? And she's like, yeah, I didn't know anybody was working the night shift, sorry. And then he puts on his suit of armor, and then he goes into the restricted room, and then he gets attacked by this creature that was in there. Oh, I forgot that he got a dream. He had a dream the night before where he also saw the face of this creature saying, stop looking for me. And then he went to night shift and started looking for the creature. So he goes into that back room, and the creature attacks him, and then he attacks the creature back and stabs it, and it dies. And he's like, maybe I should get another job. My guy, you just killed the beastie. You might as well stay here. Do you really think there's going to be a second beastie? Or do you think it's going to respawn? Then the second Bluster issue that I read opens with a samurai hiring a ninja from some agency that's asking him a bunch of benign, stupid questions, and he's getting irritated. He's like, I don't need my ninja to freaking know French. Just give me a freaking ninja. This is to be backup for a trade deal that he was put on so that he can help two kingdoms find peace. But he is the one going all alone to deliver, first to pick up the gifts, and then to deliver the gifts on behalf of the other kingdom. And so when he is getting the stuff from when he's getting herbs from one of the vegetable kingdoms, he also runs into a gladiator who attacks him because the gladiator escaped from Rome and was hiding in a bush. They called him out for hiding in the bush. The guy was like, well, I'm not going to tell you who I am. I'm going to fight you instead. And then they beat him, and then they're like, you know what? You're pretty cool. Can I join your party? Kind of feels like an RPG from like 20 years ago, where you just sort of assemble a ragtag party and everybody that you run into challenges you, but then you accept them on your team. So then they continue towards the other kingdom that they're actually trying to make peace with. And that guy is obviously shady because he's got a scar over his eye, and that's how you do. And the guy is like, oh yeah, thanks for the gifts. How about you stay for dinner? And then, of course, the gladiator and the samurai get drugged. The ninja was left on the boat just in case something foul happened. So the ninja is just waiting around to see if they come back in 3 days. And if not, he's going to swing into action. Surprise, they don't come back. And instead, some of the bad king's soldiers come onto the boat, miss the ninjas there, and just straight up go, oh yeah, we got those weirdos and we're gonna freaking execute them. And the king told us to come here to look for any other weirdos. So fortunately, these idiots just came to exposit right on top of the secret ninja that they can't see. So the ninja knows what to do. So then the ninja goes into town to sneak into the castle. And unfortunately, the king isn't keeping these special guests in the regular castle dungeon. Instead, he finds a knight, and the knight says, you know what? The king is probably keeping them in his super secret island prison, but if you let me out, I will join your party and I can show you where they are. And so then the ninja lets the knight out, and then they use the ninja's giant kite to get to the island, and they break out the ninja and the gladiator, and then there's a fight scene, and then the ninja flies into the sky using his kite because they're getting outnumbered. And fortunately, the ninja was able to disappear fast enough and quick enough to then show up at some other king's castle with a letter to be like, hey, we're gonna get dogpiled on and murdered if you don't come and help us. And then after delivering that note as fast as he could and not even being in the middle of the brawl, the ninja for some reason decides to teleport back into the brawl, where immediately they're captured by all of the bad guys and put up against the wall and about to die. But fortunately, that disappear away and disappear back was fast enough that the king also has the disappear no jutsu, where there is now a letter with this evil king that says, hey, let my people go or else we're gonna be at war. And the evil king is like, oh my gosh, I am not prepared for this. Let them go. And so then the four guys together are like, psh, we're free. That was wild, wasn't it? Oh my gosh. So those are the 3 issues that I read on the website. There are many other issues. There are a couple other issues, a couple other comics. I think there are like 5 Bluster Tale comics, and then 2 or 3 other comics that are not the Bluster universe or the Bluster Tales. The notes that I have for these comics are the setups feel like they could be punchier with the jokes. At the moment, when we're in the Bluster Universe #1, it feels like everything is primed to be super campy, but it never actually commits to the joke it's trying to make, and it just takes itself a bit too seriously for the setup. It also feels like it's a first attempt or an early attempt. Maybe it's somebody very young trying to write for the first time. The characters are just straightforward, and there's really not much depth or personality to them. The Bluster universe didn't really seem to know what it wanted to establish. In the conversation with the supervillain with the allies, one of them said, oh yeah, I think I've heard of that guy before. Wasn't he was active a few years ago before we even became superheroes, wasn't he? And the other girl was like, you know what? I think I might know that guy. Either you did know him or you didn't know him, or somebody's got to know him, or he wasn't that big of a deal. The biggest problem, though, that I saw with storytelling across all of the issues that I read was that it felt really rushed. Nothing felt established, and it didn't try to build anything. It was just very getting from place to place and then doing sort of juvenile text. So I'm not sure who the market is for it. If it's meant to be for kids, it could fit into a younger kid magazine if there was something like that still around, like highlights for kids. But I'm not really sure what the goal of the creator is. And at the moment, yeah, it just looks like a novice project. The other thing is, it just means to exist. Like, the goodies are good, the baddies are bad, and the villains are said to just be plotting for the sake of plotting, not for anything else. They just, there's no motive, there's no depth, there's the bare minimum to build a story. And that's the other biggest issue that I had with any of these, is that nothing really mattered. Because there were no established rules, because there was no established what any of these people's limitations were. Even if you look at the first Bluster Tales, where it had him go to work that first time, and then he sees the doctor in passing, the lady doctor, it didn't establish her as a person. She's just in passing panels being told that, oh, she's really popular and opening a free clinic. And then we go like 3 pages later and she's being arrested for murder. And it's like, but where did that come from? And then we get into a random suit of armor and a random demon and a random everybody is dying. And it just means that anything can happen at any given time, which means the reader shouldn't put any weight into anything because nothing matters. And the same thing with the Bluster Universe superhero comic is, if you're going to have the villain beat the good guy that first round, then why is the hero suddenly going to beat the villain the second time around when it matters? Because clearly now it's just, oh, well, we need to lengthen out this comic So we're going to make him fail the first time and then immediately find him every time he goes and looks for him after that first comic. So I don't know what the goal is with this story, with these stories, or this creator, but good luck to them. And if you'd like to check out their work, it's linked down in the description below. The next book that I'm going to discuss today is A Diary of an Oxygen Thief by Anonymous. I would describe the genre as diary, semi-literary, stream of consciousness. Is not really a genre, but it is a writing style. I don't know how else to describe this book. The summary listed on Goodreads says, quote, "Say there was a novel in which Holden Caulfield was an alcoholic and Lolita was a photographer's assistant, and somehow they met in Bright Light's big city. He's blinded by love and she by ambition. Diary of an Oxygen Thief is an honest, hilarious, and heartrending novel. Above all, a very realistic account of what we do to each other and what we allow to have done to us." I question that a little bit. What is this story really about? It's about a guy who just likes to hurt people, specifically women, He first likes to get into fights with dudes, and then he's like, I don't want to just cause physical pain. I want to cause emotional pain. And guess what? You can break people up. You can destroy people emotionally, and it is not a crime, baby. And so that's kind of what he does. And he's just like a despicable person who has a huge ego and complains about everything and brags about hurting people. And then he gets into this relationship in like the second half of the book once he's living in the United States, because I think he's from Ireland. Because he's from Ireland first, then lives in London, then goes to Minnesota, freaking hates Minnesota, then moves to New York City at some point, and then he is dating like this girl who looks very, very young for her age, which is where the Lolita photographer assistant comes in. Is she just looks really, really young, but it does say she's like 27, and she breaks his heart, and he's like, well, this sucks. I did it for sports. She did it for ambition, because she was writing a book. She was writing a book about how she manipulated me so that she could publish it and make money. I don't remember how this book came onto my radar. It was sitting in my folder of to read books, and I was just looking for something short to read this week, as I was having a difficulty focusing on books after having finished my Dark Vanessa. It was just very difficult for me to my brain was just fried this week, I swear. So I was trying to find something shorter and easier to just digest, and I don't even know why this came to me. Who suggested this, how I found this book. I just remember that I've had it for a couple of years from when that first recommendation came, and I think it had to do with having an unreliable narrator who was an abuser and reading that narration. But I honestly don't recall anymore. At the very beginning of the book, his first accounts are just about how he went about hurting people, and the first girl that he hurt was a girl named Penelope, who he dated for 4.5 years. And the only reason he decided to hurt her was because he was bored with her and he thought that it would be a fun way to break it off with her. And this is how he did it. He took her out to a bar and they hung out, and then he just started dumping on her. Quote, "This is what I look like when I'm pretending to listen to your boring conversations. This is what I look like when I'm pretending to be in love with you. Hang on, what else? Oh yeah, here's what I look like when I'm pretending that you were even slightly witty just so I can get laid later on. And this is me. This I particularly enjoyed. It has been the catchphrase of Ted Carwood, a very popular British impressionist who'd end each of his shows with that revelation before he bid us goodnight. It was the one time that he appeared as himself, and I added a variation. The accompanying expression in my case was one of pure provocation, a mixture of hit me and fuck you that I normally reserve for barroom fights with men much bigger than me. It always worked. I was saying that she was a coward if she didn't hit me. She didn't, of course. She just looked at me, innocently. This was more fun than I'd expected. Shouldn't she at least be crying? I was impressed, if you want to know the truth. But up to that point, I was merely doing stretching exercises. You think I'm joking, don't you? No response. I'm going to dismantle you tonight, and there's nothing that you can do about it. You'll have to sit there and listen to me as I wrench the you from the yes. You'll question your own judgment. Maybe you'll never really trust yourself again. I hope so. Because if I don't want you, and believe me, I don't, then I don't want you happy with someone else when there's any doubt that I might get another girl. I was not yet aware, you understand, that I was to become the sole furnace that you see before you. but I was losing the bolt uprightness that I felt that I deserved, so I added, "Your cunt is loose." She heard it, but wasn't quite sure how to react. I could help her with that too. "Let me put it another way. Your vagina is baggy, feels overused, your tits sag." This I delivered like a punch, and I leaned back to better view the effect. "They're too big and they hang too low." So after just the insult fest, it's over. And then he goes over the next couple of girls that he used. One of them was, he says she was going to be married soon and was a virgin. And he claims that she took him home and then he slept on her couch. But then in the middle of the night, he moved into her bedroom and he put the moves on her. And at first she resisted, and then it was a passive resist, and then he just kept going. And he wanted to ruin her in a way that would not take her virginity, because he wanted it to still be intact when she was with her husband to be. But at the same time, he wanted to do stuff to her that would make her husband never be able to satisfy her. So he like fingers her and gives her oral for like 2 hours, and then thinks of all of the other ways that he might be able to sexually use her to ruin her for her husband to be. I don't know if I believe him that it was consensual. I don't freaking understand any of it. Oh yeah, because with Penelope, he like said all of this stuff to her and then left her. Oh no, he said all this stuff to her and then he told her how she could get back at him by being like, "Go and date this, go out with this guy that you work with. He's super great. Call me every night, but don't say anything on the phone." And gave her like these instructions on how to make him more paranoid and to like ruin his life and get back at him for ruining her. And it says that she did some of them. Like she went out with the guy that she works with, and he says that he got a call every night for 2 weeks at 8 p.m. or something with nobody saying anything, and then it hung up. And that messed up his paranoia even worse and gave him a lot of paranoia. But he also says after he said all of these things to her and she went home without him, then he went to see her house later that same night and the door was unlocked. And he was like, "Oh, the door is unlocked for me." And then he slipped into the bed and slept beside her and then watched her get dressed and go to work the next day. And I'm just like, I don't trust you. I don't know what you're doing. I don't trust your retelling of these events, bro. That's kind of what made me think, was the unreliable narrator the reason that this came to me? Because one thing I always try to hit home on when I'm reading any single book, it doesn't matter if it's Shadow of the Conqueror, if it's My Dark Vanessa, if it's Bodymore, if it's this, if it's first person, I'm like, I can't trust exactly what you're telling me, because if you're delusional or lying, the liar or delusional person is either not going to tell you that they're lying because they don't want you to know the true lies. They're going to mislead you on what they're lying about. And the delusional or disturbed person or the defensive person or the mentally upset person is not going to tell you the things that they don't believe that we're going to have to observe with our own eyes, because that's how it works. And the more I read first person lately, the more that I love it, just because of the experience that I'm getting from it. Even when it sucks like this freaking book. But I just love first person. So this dude tells us that he works in advertising as a creative director. He was really, really good at his work. He moved to London to do the job. He had a partner in that field for a while, but he hated his partner so bad that he like went to a placement agency that said, "Hey, please find me somebody else, because if I don't get a different freaking partner, I'm going to murder this guy. Like, I hate him so much." Why does he hate him? I don't know. We never find out. This guy just talks about his feelings and doesn't actually tell us why anything is going on. He just is irritable. And then the placement agency gets him an interview with an American agency, and he's like, "Oh, thank God, get me out of London, because if I even run into this ex-partner of mine in the streets, I'm gonna freaking strangle him." Again, we're a little bit intense here. And so the narrator does get the job in Minnesota. He moves to Minnesota. He freaking hates Minnesota for how cold it is. He doesn't like the accents. He doesn't like the people. He doesn't like anything there. He buys a house, and then he never commits to any woman there because he doesn't want to end up getting stuck there. And before the first year is up, he's trying to sell the house so that he can get out of there. And he is failing at selling that house. Nobody wants to buy the house from him. And he's getting very, very, very angry, to the point that he's thinking of like attacking people at a local McDonald's. That's how much he hates the cold and hates Minnesota. And then during his job, I think it's during year 2, he gets sent to New York for a temporary work. And that's where he meets the photographer that is looking young. And they have a little tryst together, and then he goes back to Minnesota, and eventually he goes back, and he really likes this girl named Asling, and she turns out that she's basically going through different steps on how to seduce a dude, and then basically get him to do whatever you want him to do, and then dumps him because she's writing a book. Basically feels like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, but not. And there was one more quote there are a couple more quotes that I wanted to share from this. One of them is, quote, "Anyway, well into my second year there, my fourth year off booze, I was still refusing to get involved with any female. My favorite masturbation technique was to take a nice hot bath and soap up my baldy lad well and truly, and then give him a good old beating. At one stage, I was going to write a screenplay all about my right hand, a love story. There would have been scenes where I let my hand brush against my thigh and I would blush. In another, my right hand would get jealous of my left and refuse to make love. Many of the evenings I rushed home to make passionate love to myself, storing away the beautiful asses of the secretaries during the day that I'd mentally combined into one composition perfectitude of buttocksness. It worked. As you can see from the previous pages, it didn't have any perverse effect on my mental or spiritual state. If anything, another room full of McDonald's patrons was spared at the inconvenience of drawing on their medical insurance." Another one is, quote, "Money was the only subject where she showed emotion. Her lovely eyes would widen when the subject came up. So what? Can't hold that against her. Women only love money so much because we men make it hard for them to get at it. They have to massage us and our egos to get it. Otherwise, they wouldn't even bother with us, except maybe for the occasional fuck. Not unlike how we treat them." And so, I don't know. I don't know why that book is there, but now I don't have to think about it because it's over. I don't feel like I got much out of it. I was reading it and why am I here? Why am I here? This guy is just, I don't like him. I don't like any of this. Nothing is going on. The next book that I read was actually one that I enjoyed, called The Woman That They Could Not Silence, One Woman, Her Incredible Fight for Freedom, and the Men Who Tried to Make Her Disappear. And it was a nonfiction about a woman named Elizabeth Packard who lived in the 1860s, a little bit before that, because I think she already had 6 children by 1860 when she was actually institutionalized by her husband for disagreeing with him. And this actually came up because of a lot of the conversation in general that doesn't seem to understand where women's rights came from initially in America or what the fight had started with. So I started looking for nonfiction that was about the time so that I could start looking at these forced situations before feminism was a thing, or why feminism became a thing. This was before the suffragettes. This was during the Civil War period, because while she was institutionalized, the Civil War was happening, and she was sending letters to Abraham Lincoln at some point to try to get that included with what was happening or after the Civil War had ended. So what did actually happen was that she was smart, she was a very good speaker, she was very thoughtful, and she was getting people in the church to kind of think more past what her husband was saying, and her husband was like, hey, stop thinking, stop disagreeing with me, shut up. And when she didn't, he just had her institutionalized, because at the time, you didn't need evidence of insanity, you didn't need evidence of any kind, you just took the woman to the asylum, or you told people that she was insane and she'd be taken off to the asylum without any evidence. It also shows earlier on in the book that if she had any sort of an emotional response, any sort of emotional outburst, any sort of even just crying, not an outburst, but show of emotion, period, it would be considered evidence of her emotional instability. Like any show of emotion was a show of emotional instability, which is kind of funny. And the book uses a lot of notes specifically from the journals of Elizabeth and her husband, and also the doctor that mostly oversaw her while she was in the institution. They've got written work for this stuff. And it's kind of funny because so many people right now focus on 1984, the book, and saying, you've had a little too much to think. But you go back to freaking 1860 America, and even before that, and you've got women being institutionalized for having just a little bit too much to think. You're not supposed to think. You're not supposed to feel. You're just supposed to be a mother. And another thing about this is that when she got institutionalized, she had a 10-year-old daughter who was forced into the position of mother of the household because, of course, the husband wasn't going to take over the motherly duties, the wife duties. It was the woman's work. It was the women that had to do the women's work, and she had 5 sons and a daughter. So that 10-year-old daughter was thrust into becoming the mother, who was also the emotional support of the husband who institutionalized his wife. And so dad would lean on this 10-year-old girl. And it's funny because there's a point in there where Elizabeth is like, I can't believe they're doing this to Libby. She doesn't even know how to make pie crust yet. I haven't shown her the womanly duties that she needs to know to be a wife, like how to make a pie crust properly. Um, but it also shows a level of, it also describes a level of emotional burden that disrupted Libby's life to such an extent, like all of this pressure on her at such a young age. And we hear people in conversation in general harken back to the good old days when people would do this at a younger age. But what happened to Libby is that she was the least successful of all of her siblings. She had emotional issues. She got divorced from her husband. She was institutionalized by her husband, and Elizabeth had to help her daughter come out of the institution and then give her a home. And her daughter eventually committed suicide at the age of 51. And this is all, you know, assuming based off of what happened and based on what the notes that Elizabeth left behind. But her daughter was the least successful of all of her children and had this responsibility that was more than a 11, 10-year-old girl ever should have had on her, because mom was forced institutionalized. And it was also ridiculous because you had mom, you know, raising all of these kids, and none of the kids turned on mom. There was one kid at one point that was more on dad's side, but all of the sons otherwise, all the kids otherwise, wanted to protect mom. And so what dad did when he wanted to get mom institutionalized is he set up to have all of the kids out of the house when people would come and collect mom and drag her out. And so then when the kids came home, mom would already be gone and there was nothing that they could do about it. So I think it was a very interesting story, very informative, and also very funny is after she got out of the institution, like she fought and fought and fought. And Elizabeth is such an inspirational story in general because she just kept getting smacked down every move that she made, every time that she tried to fight, every person that she thought that she could trust, and she had to keep asserting herself and not giving up. And she has so much integrity. And they moved her from the regular asylum to the like crazier part of the asylum where people and walls and rooms were actually covered in feces because people stopped doing their freaking jobs over there, just overwhelmed and understaffed. And so Elizabeth, even knowing that she was put over there as a punishment for her disobedience to the lead doctor, started to take it upon herself, started to make it her mission to clean the ward and clean the patients. And even when the patients were screaming and fighting her, she still made it a job of hers to help clean and make these people feel better about themselves and to help them get into a proper place and to help the nurses in that area feel less underwhelmed and less alone by her work ethic. And it helped. Elizabeth was also incredibly smart, incredibly talented as a seamstress. So she did a lot of sewing because the patients also did so much sewing of like bedwear and clothing and sheets to save the asylums a lot of money. And as she was writing these books, she was also sewing the pages because she was writing down everything that was happening in the asylum so that she could publish it later. And she was writing 2 books, mind you. She was writing the one about why she believed that she and women and married women should have a voice that should not be overshadowed or erased when they get married. And she was doing another one about the abuses of the lead doctor, that if he didn't help, if he didn't make things right, then she was going to show the world what he was doing. And he kept making promises to her that he was going to help her, and she kept telling him. Eventually, when she exposed that she had another book, she told him, you know, you can repent and you can change your ways and I won't do this, but if you don't, then I'm going to put this book out there to expose everything. So the book that was very important to her wasn't taken away from her. She was sewing pages of it into the folds of her dresses, into the layer of her dresses, because nobody was going to freaking think to check between the layers of her skirt, and nobody was going to think it was weird for her to be sewing because she sewed all the time anyway. Elizabeth was so incredible. It was such an interesting story to read, and the book is also, since it's a nonfiction, it's full of other resources if you want to see other books about her or other information about her or asylums at the time. But I did want to read some quotes to just give an idea, because just it is so worth reading just for Elizabeth's spirit and who she is. Quote, quietly, she moved about the house, a ghost figure in her nightdress, footsteps as muffled as a woman's gagged voice. To her surprise, her husband was not in his bed. Instead, she spied him noiselessly searching through all of my trunks. Elizabeth's heart quickened, wondering what he was up to. He'd long been in the habit of trying to control her. When I was a young lady, I didn't mind so much, Elizabeth confided, for then I supposed that my husband knew more than I did, and his will was a better guide for me than my own. She'd grown up in an era when the superiority of men was almost unquestioned, so at first she swallowed that sentiment, believing women's chief office is to bear children, and that it was natural for the moon, women, to shine with light reflected from the sun. But over the years, as Theophilus had at various times confiscated her mail, refused her access to her own money, and even removed her from what he deemed as a bad influence of her friends, doubts had surfaced. The net that he had cast about her felt more like a cage than the protection marriage had promised. Once he had even threatened to sue a male acquaintance for writing her without his permission, demanding $3,000, about $94,000 today, for the affront. The Packards had married in 1839 when Elizabeth was green 22 and Theophilus a dusty 37. Theirs had been a clumsy, awkward courtship throughout which Elizabeth feared her curt fiancé, 15 years her senior, did not seem to love me much. But as Theophilus was a longtime colleague of her father and Elizabeth, an obedient daughter, she married to please my pa, committing herself to her new husband with all of the trust and confidence of a woman. Wives are not mere things. They are a part of society, Elizabeth began to argue, but Theophilus' belief, according to his wife, was that a woman has no right that a man is bound to respect. Countless times the couple had warm discussions on the subject. It was Elizabeth, naturally blessed with a most rare command of language, who triumphed in these fights. Yet her victories came at a cost. She felt the demonstrations of intellect prompted jealousy, lest I outshine him. Theophilus was stung to the quick, and his grievances slowly grew. He grumbled crossly. My wife was unfavorably affected by the tone of society, and zealously espoused almost all new notions and wild vagaries that come along. Perhaps the notion that caused him the most consternation, in Elizabeth's words, I, though a woman, have just as right to my opinion as my husband to his. Theophilus's response was telling. He did not allow his wife agency. He did not encourage her independence. Instead, he wrote that he had sad reason to fear his wife's mind was getting out of order. She was becoming insane on the subject of women's rights. Theophilus's belief extended to his children, too. He felt their hearts were wrong by nature and must be changed by grace. For their own good, he told them, so bluntly describing the hellish fate that awaited them until the children cried. Her heart hurting, Elizabeth would comfort them, and she'd counsel in opposition to Theophilus's training. Be your own judge of your own nature. Don't be deluded into the lie that you are bad. So not only was Elizabeth the raising parent, but she was also the comforting parent when it seems like Theophilus was abusing the kids. She'd write in her essays, I ask you to give my opinions no more credence than you'd think truth entitles them to. She was such a naturally persuasive person, woman or no, her husband feared her influence. Elizabeth possessed an irresistible magnetism. The pastor, in contrast, felt unusual timidity when it came to public speaking. Even without trying, she easily eclipsed him. And you see this charisma everywhere that she goes, where everybody talking, it has the people in the asylum, the nurses, even that doctor that she talks to, Dr. Farland, and the judges and the eventual lawyer that defends her in court when she's defending her ideas. They all talk about just how much charisma this woman had and that she was very good at speaking. Also, funny thing to note before I forget it at some point in here, she also crowdfunded her book because she had to self-publish her book. In the 1860s, man, she got out and she couldn't find anybody that would publish her magnum opus of a book. And so she went around selling tickets to people saying, hey, if you purchase this ticket, then once I'm able to actually publish the book, then you can bring the ticket and get it a book in exchange for that ticket. And she successfully raised the money that she needed to publish her magnum opus book. She also did this by making little pamphlets of like smaller versions of some of the things that she wrote down in her bigger book and selling those. And then that money would go to printing her magnum opus book. This book also talks about how you really didn't need anything to be deemed as insane, specifically as a woman. You would just be kind of institutionalized if a man said that you seemed insane by his means, and that any expression, even trying to prove that you were sane, anything that made you look sane, any argument that you said you were sane, just proved further that you were insane, and there was pretty much no way to show that you were sane and could be released in this position. Another quote that I want to share from this is she was uniformly kind to her charges, no matter whether they were violent or timid or rude. I do not regard an insane person as an object of reproach or contempt by any means, she said simply. They are objects of pity and compassion, for I regard insanity as the greatest misfortune which can befall a human being in this life. As such, she had only respect for those who were surviving this affliction. When every day was a battle, what courage these individuals showed, what respect and love they were due for their daily wars that they won, and Elizabeth found her kindness wrought wonders. I find, from my observations here, that lunatics won't hurt folks, if you'll only let them alone and have the pastures large enough, she said. The mentally ill were not brute beasts, but human beings with human feelings. And day by day, that late November of 1860, Elizabeth Packard, fighting a one-woman war, slowly restored their humanity to them. It required so much effort that to clean one patient in one room took a whole day's labor. And this I feel like is very important because when it comes to even discussions of today, when it comes to disagreements, when it comes to clashes and beliefs, often it comes down to people thinking that a disagreement means hating people, or a disagreement means writing somebody off totally and finding any way possible to write people off or to demonize people, and often even just dehumanize. We can easily summarize a single behavior or a couple of behaviors or the worst moment of somebody's life as their defining thing. And then that creates hatred that then turns into soul rot. And I know that I obsess with the idea of soul rot because I just feel like there's been so much anger and hatred and destruction that I've watched peel at people's souls for the last couple of years, especially, that it's been really hard to interact. And I've had friends turn on me, and I've had people lose patience with me so fast where it seems like, look, I silently accept what a lot of people say just as their perspective. And the second that it seems like I say anything of a disagreement, then there's this assumption that I hate them. It's over even stupid things like, oh, you thought that the Avatar movie was crappy? Okay. Your opinion doesn't matter to me. And that turns into, well, ban me then. Can we not disagree? There is just this heavy idea that for some reason you can't have a discussion, you can't disagree, you can't actually examine things. That's also something that irritates me is, hey, let's talk about psychology of something. Oh no, you're going to switch it to an idea of criminality or an idea of morality? I don't care. We don't live in a world of ideals, okay? We can't have a discussion about human behaviors with humans behaving like humans when you just live in an ideal, reading books, talking about these characters making decisions, and you want them always to make the ideal option or else they are some kind of horrible person. We don't make ideal decisions. We will mess up. And that's why we need compassion and patience. And we also need to not just mark people off with, oh, you are this thing, so you don't matter. Oh, you're that thing, so you don't matter. And that was also one of the points as to why I read this book, because I've been seeing so much just vileness online, and especially just the people that used to court me as a creative person or as a female just turning into nothing but insults for everything that they said. Look, we are not this thing. And it's just been frustrating, and it feels like nobody really understands. Also, again, I cannot help the number of people that obsess over, it's 1984, we're going into 1984. Do you not know the history of the United States and just how limited it was 150, 200 years ago? My guys. Couple more things on this book and then we'll move on. There were times when Elizabeth felt suicidal from all of the losses that she was taking and all of the insults and the hopelessness. She was in there for like 6 years. And she would remind herself, and her faith was the reason why she didn't end up killing herself. She said, quote, God says I mustn't kill anybody, and I am somebody. She credited the miracle of her continuing sanity to God's grace alone. Elizabeth was adamant. I have done no wrongs, and he has done nothing but wrong. She insisted that he is answerable for our family troubles, that she could not act the hypocrite by bestowing pleasantries on a being whom by my whole nature abhors, and neither would she be foolish as to let him have any further power over her. I can protect myself, thank you, she announced sharply. I have a body of my own, and a head of my own, and a heart of my own, and a will of my own, and I do not consent to share this capital with him again. I have sense enough to keep out of the fire, and old Packard's hands too. It almost amused her to see how shocked Theophilus was at the intensity of her emotions. Yes, husband, she wrote with bitter cheer, you now find that I have hating faculties as well as loving. A woman's heart was deep inside, and Theophilus was only now discovering that he was completely out of his depths. So one thing that comes in this with McFarland and with Theophilus, because they go through some insanity trials eventually inside of the asylum, and they meet with Elizabeth a couple of times to be like, well, do you want to show that you're not insane so that we can release you? And they use her sign of her not loving her husband after her husband has treated her this way as signs of her insanity, because they don't believe that women, any sane woman, can not love their husband. No matter what he does to you, no sane woman can dislike her husband. And if you dislike your husband, it's proven. If your husband abuses you and you dislike him for it, insane. But Elizabeth kept strong, and when she met with her husband, when she was forced to meet with her husband, she was like, no, I'm not letting you have this. I am not. I'm gonna close out with one more quote from this, but first, she does push for legal protections for women. She goes through a fight to be able to see her children again, because her husband she gets out of the asylum and her husband moves to a different state where they haven't gotten the protections, because she's living in Illinois. And when she gets out of the asylum there, they've gotten some protections so that she can't get sent back to the asylum. But if she follows her husband, I think it was to Connecticut, where he's taken her children. He's got friends there. They're ready to reinstitutionalize her there, so she can't even see her kids yet. And so she keeps going to try to push for more protections for married women, because also in this, it talks about how when you became a woman, when you became married, any freedoms or any recognition you had as a free woman gets erased into your husband's shadow once you get married. And so she talks about having given up all of any rights that she had, which were still less than men's rights, when she got married, and she had no choice. She had no option. She was basically subjugated entirely. And so she does fight, and she does actually get to see her children again. And unlike her husband, who didn't want to let her see her kids, when she finally gets to see her kids, she allows her husband to see the kids too. They live with her, but he walks with them to church, and she just treats him as a gentleman stranger. And so he can be with his kids, but she's like, I don't have a relationship with you. And McFarland, who ran the asylum, where she kept getting moved around because she was such a pain, and where they were like, basically there was some outsmarting going on between the two of them, where they were just, she was trying to outsmart him, he was trying to outsmart her. Elizabeth did so much damage to McFarland's confidence, to McFarland's emotions, however you want to put it, that after he left the asylum that he worked in over Elizabeth, which he stayed on there for a couple more years after she got out, he went and opened his own asylum that was males only. Take that however you will. But the last quote that I want to leave you all with is some cheerleading from Elizabeth, where she said, quote, I now fear God's chastening rod for not publishing it, the book, more than I do the public criticism. In the end, she took her own advice. We must be palsied by no fear to offend, no desire to please, and no dependence upon the judgment of others. It's always going to be a hard thing to present ideas and to present discussions that are possibly going to offend people, or possibly be morally against other people, or possibly just be completely against that trigger an emotional response of people, because you're talking about something so deeply personal, be it something traumatic, be it something moral, be it something faith related, be it something that is so tied to your or their identities, that we see it all the time. And I sort of talked about it on Saturday with how do you even talk about books when something in a book is going to offend people, when something in a book is going to be taken the wrong way and it's going to be used against you. And I know that I've got ideas that it'll be interesting to see how they turn out in the court of public opinion. But what we have to do is follow through with what we believe is important to share. And this feels especially important to me at the moment, where this last week, as I'm recording this, and the last couple of weeks, feels so heavy on just what I'm trying to discuss with people, or where I feel like such a failure when it comes to trying to have conversations, where I know that I can be brash, and I know that I can be not the most eloquent person, and I know that I can also be kind of risque in the discussions that I bring forward, and I feel defective all the time because I don't know what I'm doing wrong. That constantly leads into the offense of other people, and I wonder if it's even worth doing what I'm even doing, if I'm doing anything worth doing, because what if everything that I say and everything that I do always just upsets and offends people? And I can only do the best that I can do, but if it's always just hurting people, am I even doing anything worth doing? And I guess I needed the reminder that sometimes it can be a little hard, a little lonely, and you can feel insane looking at the status quo of like what other people consider normal, and you get yelled at for so much less. You get people mad at you for so much less. Why are people stalking people over books? I don't know. It's not the first time. Anyway, I think Elizabeth's story is a very interesting one. It's a very hopeful one. It's a very thoughtful one. Obviously, not everything came out roses in general. She spent her life trying to push for more rights, not just for women, but for the mentally ill, specifically also for married women, because she was a victim of marriage laws and the disadvantage of marriage. And then you still saw what she experienced being abused decades later with other people, and it just shows you how much things don't change despite things changing, if you know what I mean. But I think Elizabeth Packard's story is one that doesn't get, considering I only just found out about it when I was specifically looking into this subject, I don't think it's something that's talked about enough, and neither is just the history and how much, even how we are in America now, we take it for granted where we are now or what we look at now and go, well, it was better 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when it was a situation you can't even begin to understand. You have it so good now. So highly recommend that book. The last couple of things that I'm going to mention are going to be super quick because they are movies and a video game, or movies, a movie, a television show, and a video game. The first is 11/23/63, which is a television series inspired by a book of the same name by Stephen King. This was brought to me by Monty. We watched it together because, as you know, Stephen King is one of Monty's favorite authors, and so she wanted to share that series because she really liked that series. It stars James Franco, which I'll never forget. We started it, and I was like, oh, hey, that guy looks like James Franco. And she's like, that's because it is James Franco. But that's a story about a guy who discovers a wormhole in a closet that takes him back to 1963, a couple of months before 11/23/63, and somebody asks him to try to stop the Kennedy assassination. And he does, and things happen, but other things happen during that time period. And I always generally love stories. Well, I have a spot in my heart where I see where actions lead to things happening, and you can directly see choices that are being made. Very character-driven story. I very much enjoyed it. A bittersweet ending. But not a traumatic ending. The next thing that I want to mention is I saw The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. I also saw that with a friend locally, and I thought that the character chemistry was really great. I thought the story was fun, and it took many different directions that I was not expecting. Very action-packed, but mostly I just loved the character chemistry. That's where it was at. It made me think of what I want to do with my aliens and the alien crew that I'm working on with Monty. I don't have a whole lot to say on that. It's historical, it's World War II, and it's a different perspective of the World War II, since it's dealing with convicts that were grabbed for a secret assignment, that if they were caught by the British, then Churchill was going to have to be like, I don't know who you people are. And if they were caught by the Nazis, they were also going to be killed. There is also a very large Nordic man in there. The last thing that I will mention today is Horizon Zero Dawn, the video game. Recently played that for Sunday nights. I thought it was really fun. That is a story about a girl who, I think at its peak, okay, this is going to be very quick, but I think that is peak YA storytelling, because you have Aloy, who starts out as, a young girl with her dad, Ross, or her adopted dad, Ross, and she's rejected from the tribe because she doesn't have a mother like everybody else, and it's a tribe that worships motherhood especially. And then she goes and does the special games to basically be accepted, the obstacle course, to basically be accepted among the tribe. And then they're attacked by these bad guys, and there's this mixture of technology in with the Nordic mythology, and some of the monsters actually feel like titans as well. And you have references to Greek mythology in some of the names, like Hades. And you find out that Zero Dawn is basically starting time over. Think of it as a big bang, because everybody died and it got washed, and everything had to start over and rebuilding because the humans created an AI that wiped out all of the humans, and they did create a backup plan full of clones, and Zero Dawn is basically just starting things over to try to rebuild society. And it's clean, it's fun, it's action, and Aloy is a fantastic character. She is brave, she is thoughtful, she is honest, she is courageous, she is not without her flaws, she kind of gets lost in herself. She's very straightforward. She's very flat. She kind of doesn't have time for BS because she's just like, look, I have lived outside of society for a while, okay? I don't care about your freaking BS drama. Let's just freaking deal with this. I don't have time for this. And it was fun. The fun gameplay, fun story, and I'm looking forward to the second one. Obviously, those reviews are much slimmer than the others because I was not taking notes during all those things. But I can say that I recommend 112363. I can recommend Horizon Zero Dawn, and Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare was also fun. Much shorter time expense on that. So if you're looking for anything to watch or play, or you want to know some of the things that I enjoy in that medium, there are those. With that said, those are what I have to share with you today. Will you read any of the books mentioned today? Have you read any of the books mentioned today? Have you ever heard of Elizabeth Packard? With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?